I opened my eyes to a ceiling I did not recognize. It was painted with angels, not the chubby, cheerful cherubs of a village church, but real angels, tall, solemn, beautiful, with golden wings and faces full of sorrow.
Thank God you have come back to me.
As though they knew something terrible and were too kind to say it. The ceiling was very high, the room was very large, and I was lying in a bed so wide and so soft that for a moment I thought I was still dead, because I had been dying. I remembered that much. The fever, scarlet, vicious burning had taken hold of me 3, 4, I did not know how many days ago. I remembered the heat of it. The way my skin had felt like paper held too close to a flame. I remembered my father's voice. "Stay with me, Eliza. Stay with me," growing fainter and fainter, as if he were the one leaving and not I. I remembered nothing after that. Nothing except a voice. A man's voice, deep and cracked with something that sounded like grief, saying words I could not quite hear, and a hand holding mine, a hand that was warm and steady and would not let go. I turned my head. He was there. A man I had never seen before was asleep in a chair beside my bed. He was tall, even folded into the chair, his legs stretched long. His hair was dark brown, almost mahogany. His jaw was sharp, unshaven, as though he had not slept properly in days. His coat was rumpled, his cravat undone, and there were shadows under his eyes so deep they looked like bruises. He was holding my hand. Not loosely, not politely, he was holding it the way a drowning man holds a rope, with both hands, knuckles white, as though letting go would kill him, and on my finger, on the fourth finger of my left hand, there was a ring, a gold ring, a wedding ring. I stared at it. I stared at him. I stared at the painted angels on the ceiling of a room I had never seen, in a house I had never entered, wearing a ring I had never been given. And I said in a voice that cracked like old wood, "Where am I?" His eyes opened. They were green, deep, dark, devastated green, the green of a forest after rain, the green of something that has been waiting and waiting and waiting and has finally, impossibly been answered. He looked at me. His face did something extraordinary. It broke apart and rebuilt itself in the space of a single breath. Shock, disbelief, and then a joy so raw, so naked, so unguarded that it looked like it hurt. "You're awake?" he whispered. His voice shook. "Oh God, you're awake? Who are you?" I said. He looked at me with those wrecked green eyes, and he said, "I am your husband. My name is Eliza Thorne. I was born in the village of Ashford Cross, in the county of Kent, in a crooked little shop that smelled of dried rosemary camphor and the peculiar sweetness of chamomile left too long in the sun. The shop was my father's, Mr. William Thorne, apothecary, herbalist, and the closest thing to a doctor that our village had ever known. My mother died when I was 7, a winter cough that turned to pneumonia. My father could not save her. It was the only failure that ever broke him. And it broke him so completely that he spent the rest of his life trying to save everyone else, as though enough rescued strangers might balance the one person he had lost. He taught me everything. Not the way fathers taught daughters in those days, needlework, deportment, the art of pouring tea without scandal. He taught me the way he would have taught a son, if God had given him one. I learned to read Latin prescriptions before I could read English novels. I could identify foxglove by scent, calculate a tincture dosage by weight, and set a broken bone by the time I was 14. I was not pretty, not in the porcelain, pearl, and silk way that pretty meant in Regency, England. I had copper-red hair that tangled in every breeze, a face full of freckles that no amount of lemon juice could fade, and amber eyes that people called strange when they were being polite and witchy when they were not. But I was useful. In a village with no physician, an apothecary's daughter who could mix a fever draught, deliver a baby, and lance an abscess was worth more than beauty. I was the one they sent for at midnight when a child was coughing blood. I was the one who sat with the dying when no one else could bear it. I was the one who knew always what to do. Until the scarlet fever came. It arrived in October of 1819, carried, we believed, by a peddler from London. It moved through the village like fire through dry grass. The baker's twins were the first. Then the blacksmith's wife. Then the vicar's housekeeper. The schoolmaster, 3 children from the cottages by the river. My father and I worked without rest. 14, 16, 18 hours a day, mixing remedies, brewing willow bark tea, bathing burning foreheads with cool cloths, holding hands that shook with fever. I was so busy saving everyone else that I did not notice when the fever found me. It began with a sore throat on a Thursday morning. By Thursday evening, I could not swallow. By Friday, my skin was covered in the telltale rash, red as a sunset, rough as sandpaper. By Saturday, I could not stand. My father carried me to bed. I was 22 years old, and my father, 61, thin, exhausted, his own hands trembling, carried me like I was 7 again. "Stay with me, Eliza," he said. "Stay with me." I truly tried, but the fever was stronger than trying. What I'm about to tell you, I learned later, pieced together from my father's account, from the housekeeper, Mrs. Hewitt, from the vicar, and from the man himself, who told me the parts that no one else could know. On the second night of my fever, Saturday, my father sent word to every household in the parish that his daughter was dying. This was not dramatics. My father was an apothecary. He knew what dying looked like. He had watched enough of it. The word traveled as word does in small villages, from mouth to mouth, from cottage to cottage, from the village to the great house on the hill. Thornfield Hall. Thornfield Hall was the largest estate in Kent, a sprawling Palladian mansion set among 3,000 acres of parkland, with formal gardens, a lake, a stable of 40 horses, and a master who was, by all accounts, the most private, most reclusive, most impossible to understand nobleman in the south of England. Lord Sebastian Hale, 5th Duke of Thornfield, was 29 years old. He was tall, dark-haired, sharp-featured, and wealthy beyond comprehension. He was also, according to the village, cold, distant. A man who kept to himself, who rarely entertained, who spoke to no one he did not have to, and who had rebuffed every matchmaking attempt by every ambitious mother within 100 miles. A peculiar man, Mrs. Hewitt would say, not unkind, but locked away inside himself like a book no one has permission to read. What the village did not know, what no one knew, was that the Duke of Thornfield had been visiting my father's shop every fortnight for the past 8 months. He came always in the late afternoon when the shop was quiet. He came on foot, not by carriage, wearing a plain coat that made him look like any country gentleman. He bought things he did not need, a headache powder, a digestive tonic, a salve for a saddle blister that had healed weeks ago. He browsed the shelves, he asked questions about herbs, about remedies, about the properties of willow bark and the cultivation of lavender, and he talked to me. Not the way men usually talk to me, briskly, transactionally. "My son has a cough, what do you recommend?" He talked to me the way one person talks to another when they have discovered, to their own astonishment, that the other person is the most interesting thing in the world. He asked me about my reading. I told him I was teaching myself botany from a book by Dr. Withering. He brought me a better one, a first edition, worth more than our shop, and left it on the counter with a note that said simply, "For the botanist, SHH." He asked me about my work. I told him about a child I had treated for croup using a steam tent and thyme oil. He listened with such intensity that I felt, for the first time in my life, that my knowledge was not merely useful but valued. He never told me his title. He introduced himself as Mr. Hale. I assumed he was a gentleman farmer, educated, comfortable, nothing extraordinary. He was quiet, awkward in a way that was endearing rather than cold, and he had a habit of looking at me when he thought I was not looking back, a long, steady, searching look, as though he were memorizing something he was afraid to forget. I liked him, more than liked him. But I was an apothecary's daughter, with freckles and herbs under her fingernails, and he was, I believed, a gentleman with a good coat and a kind manner. The distance between us was small but uncrossable, or so I thought on the Saturday night when my father sent word that I was dying. A rider arrived at Thornfield Hall within the hour. The Duke, Mr. Hale, my quiet, awkward, book-bringing Mr. Hale, did something that no one who knew him could explain. He rode to Ashford Cross in the dark. In the rain, alone, without his steward, without his valet, without explanation. He arrived at my father's shop at 11 o'clock at night, soaked through, white-faced and shaking, not from the cold, but from something far worse. My father opened the door and found the Duke of Thornfield on his doorstep. "Where is she?" Sebastian said. My father, who had no idea the Duke had ever set foot in his shop, who had certainly never met him, who was himself half mad with exhaustion and grief, simply pointed upstairs. Sebastian walked past him, up the narrow stairs into the cramped bedroom where I lay in a narrow bed, burning with fever, barely breathing, with the scarlet rash covering my skin like a curse. He sat down beside me, he took my hand, and he did not leave. By Sunday morning, I was worse. My father said later that my breathing had become shallow, irregular, the breathing of someone whose body was giving up. The rash had spread to my throat. My pulse was thin and fast. My father believed I would not survive the day. At noon, Sebastian asked to speak with him alone. "I want to marry her," Sebastian said. My father stared at him. "She is dying. I know. She cannot hear you. She cannot consent. She does not even know you're here. I know. Then why, in God's name, why would you marry a dying woman?" Sebastian looked at my father with eyes that held nothing back. No pride, no reserve, no aristocratic distance, just the raw, unadorned truth of a man who had kept silent too long and was running out of time. "Because I have loved her for 8 months," he said. "Because I came to your shop every fortnight to hear her talk about willow bark and thyme oil, and every time I left I told myself I would speak tomorrow, and tomorrow never came. Because if she dies, and I know she may, I want her to have died knowing she was loved. I want the last words she hears on this earth to be a vow, not a prescription, not a prayer, a vow, my vow." He paused. "And if by some miracle she lives, I want her to wake up safe. I want her to wake up with my name, my protection, my fortune, and every resource I possess turned toward keeping her alive. I want the finest doctors in England at her bedside before sunset. I want her to have everything. Everything I have." My father was silent for a long time. "You are asking me to give my daughter to a man she has never met," he said. "She has met me," Sebastian said quietly. "She knows me as Mr. Hale. She knows me as the man who brought her a book about botany and asked too many questions about lavender. She does not know my title. She does not know my wealth. She knows only me. And I swear to you on my life that the man she knows is the real one." The vicar was summoned. He protested, as vicars do. Sebastian overruled him, not with authority but with desperation so complete that even a man of the cloth could see it was not politics but love. The ceremony was performed at my bedside. I was unconscious. My father held my hand and whispered the responses on my behalf. Sebastian placed the ring on my finger, a plain gold band, not the Thornfield diamond, because he wanted nothing that would frighten me if I woke. "If she woke," he had said if. When the vicar pronounced us married, Sebastian leaned down and pressed his lips to my forehead, gently, barely touching, as though I were made of something that might dissolve. "Come back to me," he whispered. "Please, come back to me." Then he sent for the 3 finest physicians in London. They arrived by Monday evening, they worked through the night. And on Wednesday morning, 3 days after the wedding, I opened my eyes to a ceiling painted with angels, a ring on my finger, and a stranger asleep in a chair beside my bed, holding my hand like a drowning man holds a rope. "I am your husband." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. "That is not possible," I said. My voice was a ruin, cracked, dry, barely above a whisper. "I am not married." "You are," he said. He was sitting forward now, his elbows on his knees, his wrecked green eyes never leaving my face. "We married 3 days ago, at your bedside in your father's house. The vicar performed the ceremony. I was dying, yes. I was unconscious, yes. And you married me anyway. Yes." I stared at him. The ring on my finger was warm, body warm, as though it had been there long enough to become part of me. "Why?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and what came out was not the grand declaration I expected, not the ducal pronouncement, but something small and broken and absolutely honest. "Because I could not bear to let you go without telling you that you were loved." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever known. "I don't know you," I whispered. Something flickered in his eyes, pain quickly buried. "You do," he said. "You know me as Mr. Hale. The man who bought too many headache powders and asked you about lavender." I stared. "Mr. Hale, yes. Mr. Hale who brought me the botany book, yes. Mr. Hale who once spent 40 minutes asking me about the medicinal properties of dandelion and then bought a digestive tonic he clearly did not need." A ghost of a smile. The dandelion conversation was genuinely interesting. "You are Mr. Hale." I am also, and I should have told you this months ago, Lord Sebastian Hale, the Duke of Thornfield." The room tilted, or perhaps that was the fever. "You are a duke," I said flatly. "Yes. And you married me, an apothecary's daughter, while I was unconscious and dying. When you put it like that, it sounds considerably worse than it felt at the time." "How did it feel at the time?" He looked at me, and the mask, The careful, controlled, aristocratic reserve that I had always mistaken for coldness dissolved entirely. "It felt like the bravest and most terrified thing I have ever done," he said. "It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and jumping because the alternative, walking away, was worse than falling. It felt like the only honest thing I have done in my entire life." I closed my eyes, not because I was tired, though I was desperately, but because I needed a moment without his face, without those green eyes and the terrible, beautiful truth in them. "I need to think," I said. "Of course. Can you send for my father? He is downstairs. He has been here since Sunday." He would not leave. "And how long have you been in that chair?" 3 days. 3 days. I told you I would not let go. I looked at his hands, still wrapped around mine, white-knuckled, steady, the hands of a man who had held on through 3 days of fever, 3 nights of uncertainty, 3 dawns of not knowing whether the woman in the bed would open her eyes or stop breathing. "You can let go now," I said softly. "I'm here." He let go, and then quietly with his face turned away so I could not see. The Duke of Thornfield wept. Recovery was slow. The scarlet fever had taken nearly everything. My strength, my weight, my voice for a time, and 3 weeks of my life that existed only as fever dreams and shadows. The London physicians prescribed rest, broth, fresh air, and patience. Sebastian prescribed all of these things in quantities that bordered on obsessive. I was moved to Thornfield Hall, gently, by carriage, wrapped in blankets, with Sebastian riding alongside like a guard escorting a treasure. My father came too, installed in a guest room with a fire and a shelf of medical texts that Sebastian had ordered from London within hours of my waking. Thornfield Hall was magnificent, not with the cold grandeur of a museum, but with the warm, lived-in beauty of a house that had been loved for generations. Oak-paneled corridors, a great staircase that curved like a river, a morning room that caught the winter sun and held it like a cup, and everywhere on windowsills, on side tables, in unexpected corners, books, hundreds of books, thousands. "You have more books than patience," I told Sebastian. "Books are easier than people," he said. "They do not require small talk." He was, I discovered, exactly what the village had said. Private, quiet, locked away inside himself, but the village had mistaken the lock for coldness. It was not cold, it was shyness, a deep, bone-level discomfort with the performance of aristocratic life. The dinners, the balls, the endless parade of people who wanted his title, his money, his land, his attention, his everything, and never once asked what he wanted. What he wanted, it turned out, was remarkably simple. A conversation about dandelions with a red-haired woman who smelled of rosemary and did not care that he was a duke. He visited me every day during my recovery. He brought books chosen, as before, with uncanny precision. He sat by the fire and read while I slept. He fetched my medicine himself, refusing to let the servants do it because, as Mrs. Hewitt told me with a knowing smile, His Grace mixed every dose personally to be sure the measurements were exact. He said you taught him about tinctures. He was gentle, patient, endlessly considerate, and completely, utterly terrified of me. "You're afraid I will leave," I said one afternoon. He looked up from his book. "The thought has occurred to me. I was unconscious when we married. I did not consent. Any court in England would annul this marriage. I know. So why haven't you offered me that option?" He set down his book. He looked at the fire for a very long time. And then he said something that rewrote the entire architecture of my heart. "Because I'm afraid that if I offer you the door, you will walk through it. And I am not strong enough to watch you leave. Not after watching you almost die. I know this is selfish. I know I should give you the choice, and I will, I swear to you, I will give you every choice. But please, not yet. Not until you're strong enough to leave because you want to, not because you feel you have to. Sebastian, yes, I am not going anywhere." He looked at me. The fear in his green eyes, the 3-day, 3-night, holding on while drowning fear, finally, slowly began to ease. "You're not?" "No, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, no more secrets. If you are a duke, be a duke. Do not hide things from me to protect me." "Agreed." "Second, I want a garden. Not a decorative garden, a working garden, medicinal herbs, the kind my father taught me. I want to continue my work. You shall have the entire South Terrace. I'll have it cleared by spring. Third, I want to fall in love with you properly, not because you saved me, not because you married me, not because I have nowhere else to go. I want to fall in love with you the way I was beginning to fall in love with Mr. Hale. Slowly, honestly, one conversation at a time." He stared at me. You were falling in love with Mr. Hale? He brought me a first edition of Withering's Botanical Arrangement and spent 40 minutes discussing dandelions. Of course I was falling in love with him. The Duke of Thornfield smiled. It was, I am not exaggerating, the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It transformed his entire face from guarded and remote to radiant, boyish, and startlingly vulnerable. Then I accept your conditions, he said. All of them. For 6 weeks we were happy. Quietly, carefully, honestly happy. Sebastian courted me in my own home, which was also his home, which made the whole arrangement absurd and wonderful. He brought me books. I taught him to make a cough syrup. He showed me the library, 12,000 volumes, catalogued by his grandfather. I showed him how to propagate rosemary cuttings. He read to me when the headaches came, a remnant of the fever. I beat him at chess 3 times running, and the look on his face, stunned delight, as though losing to me was better than winning against anyone else, made me laugh until I cried. We talked about everything. About his lonely childhood in this enormous house, raised by tutors and servants after his parents died in a carriage accident when he was 12. About my mother's death and the way my father had rebuilt his life around other people's suffering, about what it meant to be known, truly known, and how rare and frightening and necessary it was. We did not share a bedroom. Sebastian slept in his own suite, at the far end of the corridor. He kissed me once, on the cheek, softly, after I beat him at chess the 3rd time, and then turned scarlet and apologized as though he had committed a crime. You are my wife, I pointed out. You are allowed to kiss me. I'm allowed to do many things, he said. That does not mean you are ready for them. He was right. I was not ready. But I was getting closer every day. And then Lady Vivienne Carlyle arrived. She came in a carriage so polished it hurt to look at, drawn by 4 matched greys, attended by a maid and a footman, and an air of absolute entitlement. She was 27 years old, platinum blonde, with ice blue eyes and cheekbones that could cut glass. She was beautiful in the way that a blade is beautiful, sharp, bright, and designed to draw blood. She swept into the entrance hall without invitation. Sebastian, darling, she said, I heard the most extraordinary rumor. They're saying you married an unconscious peasant girl on her deathbed. She laughed, a bright, brittle, porcelain laugh. Please tell me it's not true. Sebastian, who had been standing in the hall beside me, went very still. Lady Vivienne, I did not invite you. Of course you didn't, darling. You never invite anyone. That's why I invite myself. She turned to me. Her ice blue eyes traveled from my copper hair to my freckled face to my plain muslin dress, a dress that Mrs. Hewitt had found for me because I own nothing suitable for a duchess, and her lip curled. So it is true, she said. How? Charitable. What the village did not know, what I did not know until that moment, was that Lady Vivienne Carlyle had been positioned as the future Duchess of Thornfield for 6 years. Her family's estate bordered Sebastian's. Their fathers had discussed a match before both died. Society expected it. Lady Vivienne expected it. The only person who had never expected it was Sebastian, who had quietly, stubbornly, persistently refused to propose without ever explaining why. Now everyone knew why. He had been in love with an apothecary's daughter who smelled of rosemary and talked about dandelions. Lady Vivienne was not the kind of woman who accepted rejection gracefully. Over the following weeks, she launched her campaign. She wrote to every family in the county, describing my origins in language designed to wound. She visited the vicar and questioned the legality of the marriage. The girl was unconscious. She could not consent. This is not a marriage. It is an abduction. She cornered Mrs. Hewitt in the kitchen and demanded to know if I was truly recovered or merely performing wellness to keep my position. And then she found the weapon she had been looking for. The law. Lady Vivienne arrived at Thornfield Hall on a Tuesday afternoon with a solicitor and a document. The marriage is void, the solicitor announced. Under both canon and civil law, a valid marriage requires the free and informed consent of both parties, Miss Thorne. I will not call her the Duchess, as the title was never legitimately conferred, was unconscious at the time of the ceremony. She could not consent. The marriage is therefore null and void, and any property, title, or privilege conferred upon her is to be returned immediately. Lady Vivienne stood behind him, smiling the way a cat smiles at a cornered bird. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, his face unreadable. Is this true? I asked. My voice was steady, but my hands, hidden in the folds of my dress, were shaking. The solicitor looked at me with professional indifference. The law is quite clear, Miss Thorne. She is not Miss Thorne, Sebastian said quietly. She is the Duchess of Thornfield. Not according to the ecclesiastical court, she isn't. Lady Vivienne has filed a formal petition. On what grounds? On the grounds of non-consent, Your Grace. The marriage cannot stand. The room went silent. I looked at Sebastian. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not defeat, but something worse. Guilt. The crushing, suffocating guilt of a man who had done what he thought was right and was now watching it destroy the person he had tried to protect. I will speak with my wife alone, Sebastian said. They left. We stood in the study, the fire cracking between us, and for the first time since I had woken up, the distance between us felt uncrossable. Tell me the truth, I said. Is the marriage legal? I do not know, he said. My solicitors say it is defensible. Her solicitors say it is not. It would go to court. It would take months. Your name, our names, would be dragged through every newspaper in England. And if she wins, then you are not my wife. You never were. Everything I gave you, the name, the protection, the home, it all disappears. I looked at him, this quiet, brilliant, terrified man who had ridden through the rain to marry a dying woman because he could not bear to let her go without hearing a vow. Why didn't you just tell me, I said. 8 months you came to the shop. 8 months you bought powders you didn't need and asked questions about herbs you already knew the answers to. Why didn't you just say it? Because I was afraid. Of what? Of this. He gestured around the room, the vast study, the painted ceiling, the ancestral portraits, the crushing weight of wealth and title. All of this. I was afraid that the moment you knew what I was, you would stop seeing who I was. Every woman I have ever met has seen the title first and the man second. You were the only person who ever saw me first. Just me. Mr. Hale with his unnecessary headache powders, I could not bear to lose that. The court date was set for the 15th of March. For 3 weeks, Lady Vivienne's solicitors built their case. Witness statements were collected. The vicar was deposed. My father, my poor, exhausted, heartbroken father, was summoned to testify about the state of my consciousness during the ceremony. I spent those 3 weeks preparing, not for court, for something harder. I went back to the village. I walked into my father's shop, the shop where I had grown up, where I had learned to heal, where a quiet man in a plain coat had once spent 40 minutes discussing dandelions. And I sat behind the counter and I thought about what it meant to be loved without being asked. I thought about a man who married a dying woman, not for her money, not for her beauty, not for her connections, because she had none of these things, but because he could not bear to let her die without hearing that she was loved. I thought about what consent really meant, not the legal definition, the human one. And then I remembered something. It came back slowly, the way fever dreams do, in fragments, in flashes, in pieces of sound and light that reassembled themselves like a broken mirror being put back together. I remembered the ceremony, not all of it, not clearly, but I remembered the voice, his voice deep and cracked with grief, saying the vows. I remembered the vicar's question, "Do you take this man?" And I remembered faintly, distantly, like hearing a bell through fog, my own voice. I had whispered something. I could not hear it clearly in the memory, but I had whispered. I went to my father. Did I speak, I asked, during the ceremony? Did I say anything? My father looked at me, his eyes filled with tears. You said yes, he whispered. You could barely breathe. Your eyes were closed. But when the vicar asked if you would take this man, you whispered, yes, I heard it. The vicar heard it. We both looked at each other, and we knew you were there. Somewhere in the fever, you were there. And you said yes. The hearing was held in the Ashford Cross Assembly Rooms, a small wood-paneled hall that usually hosted dances and parish meetings, now crowded with solicitors, witnesses, and half the county come to watch the spectacle. Lady Vivienne sat at the front, immaculate in dove-gray silk, radiating confidence. Sebastian sat beside me. He had offered again to release me to annul the marriage himself and spare me the public scrutiny. Absolutely not, I said. Eliza. I said yes. He looked at me. What? At the ceremony? When the vicar asked if I would take you? I was unconscious. I was burning with fever. I was closer to dead than alive, and I said yes. I remember it. My father heard it. The vicar heard it. Sebastian stared at me as though the ground had shifted beneath him. You said yes? I said yes. You, even then, The hearing began. Lady Vivienne's solicitor made his case, eloquent, precise, devastating, non-consent unconsciousness. A man of power taking advantage of a dying woman's helplessness. It was compelling, it was logical, it was also wrong. When it was our turn, Sebastian's solicitor called the vicar to the stand, Reverend Whitmore. During the ceremony, did Miss Thorne, as she was then, give any indication of consent? The vicar, an honest man who sweated visibly under public attention, nodded. She did, sir. When I asked the question, "Do you take this man?" She whispered. I heard the word clearly. She said yes. She was unconscious. Lady Vivian's solicitor objected. She was fevered. The vicar corrected. Not unconscious. There is a difference. I have attended many deathbeds. I know the difference between a body that is empty and a body that is fighting. Miss Thorne was fighting, and she said yes. My father was called next. He confirmed the same. He had heard me whisper. He had seen my lips move, and then I stood. I was still thin, still pale, still bearing the marks of a fever that had nearly killed me. But I stood, and when I spoke, my voice did not shake. My lords, I am Eliza Thorne. I am also by law and by choice the Duchess of Thornfield. I am told that my marriage is invalid because I could not consent. I am told that I was helpless, that I was powerless, that decisions were made for me without my knowledge. I looked at Lady Vivienne, but I was not helpless. I was ill. There is a difference. My body was burning, but my mind, the mind that my father trained, the mind that mixed tinctures and set bones and saved children from croup, my mind was there. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to hear a man's voice saying vows that broke with love, and enough to whisper one word in response. I turned to the court. Yes, I said yes. Not because I knew he was a duke, not because I wanted his title or his house or his fortune. I said yes because even in the depths of the worst fever of my life, I recognized his voice, the voice of the man who came to my father's shop and talked to me about dandelions. The voice of a man who saw me, not my freckles, not my poverty, not my herb-stained hands, but me. And I said yes, because that voice was the one thing in the darkness that felt like home. The room was silent. I choose this marriage, I said. I choose this man. Not because he married me while I was dying, but because he loved me while I was living, quietly, awkwardly, with unnecessary headache powders and first edition botany books, and never once asked for anything in return. I sat down. Lady Vivian's solicitor had no further questions. The court ruled in our favor. The marriage stood. Lady Vivian left without speaking. She did not look at me. She did not look at Sebastian. She walked to her carriage, climbed in, and was gone. She would marry a viscount the following spring. She would be perfectly content. Some people are not villains. They are simply people who wanted something that was never theirs. It is April now. I am writing this in the South Terrace garden at Thornfield Hall. The garden Sebastian gave me. The garden I built with my own hands over the winter. With cuttings from my father's shop and seeds ordered from London and soil that I turned myself because a duchess who can set a bone can certainly turn soil. There is rosemary here, lavender, chamomile, thyme. Foxglove growing carefully in a fenced section, beautiful and deadly because medicine, like love, is sometimes both. My father lives in the East Wing. He has his own study, his own shelves, his own fire. He sees patients from the village 3 days a week. A duke's estate is not too grand for an apothecary, not when the apothecary's daughter runs the household. Sebastian is reading in the library, or pretending to read. I can see him through the window, glancing up every few minutes to look at me in the garden, the way he used to glance at me across the counter of the shop, as though he cannot quite believe I am real. There is a ring on my finger. Not the plain gold band from the deathbed ceremony, though I keep that one in a box by my bed with a pressed dandelion flower and a note that says, "For the botanist." The ring I wear now is the Thornfield emerald, a deep green stone the color of his eyes, set in gold that has been worn by 5 duchesses before me. I am the 6th, the freckled one, the one who smells of rosemary. Last week I told Sebastian I was pregnant. He dropped his book. He stared at me. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then crossed the room in 2 strides, dropped to his knees, pressed his face against my stomach and said, "Thank you for saying yes." I ran my fingers through his dark hair and looked out the window at the garden I had built, the herbs, the flowers, the soil, and I thought about the woman on the deathbed, the woman with the fever and the red rash and the fading pulse, the woman who heard a voice in the darkness and whispered one word, yes, the smallest word in the English language, the bravest thing I have ever said, and the only thing that mattered.